What's on my master bus and what do I use during mastering? Hello and welcome to this video. If you're new here, welcome. If you're returning, hello again. I'm Dave and I'm going to tell you what I'm using on my master bus and also what I use for mastering. Let's start with the master bus. So at the moment, when I put in the master insert on the desk, it goes to a UV EQ. That's the first thing that my mix goes to, is one of my UV EQs. They sound great. They're just really high quality SSL EQs and it's wonderful. And the trim pot on it allows me to tweak the level going into whatever the next thing, either push it up or bring it down going into the next unit, which is great to have that on a stereo EQ. It's wonderful. So next in the chain after that, I'm using my SSL Fusion. The SSL Fusion is a wonderful mastering unit. It's got an input gain at the beginning as well. Drive, saturation, whatever you want to call it. That sounds absolutely fabulous. You've got the high frequency compressor. You've got a high pass filter on it. After that, you've got stereo width. You can play about, you can really do some nice stereo image stuff with that unit. And it's got a transformer saturation. It's got an insert point. You can also run it in mid-side, so that insert point can run in mid-side if you choose to do so. If you're sending out to a compressor that can't do mid-side, you can use the Fusion to do the mid-side stuff for you by running that compressor in the insert point of it. And yeah, it's a really, really nice unit. I think I've mentioned everything in it. I'm just going to check. It's also got some EQ on it. It's got the low and the high EQ, the violet EQ, which is the same stuff that's on the UV EQ, but you can never have too much EQ. If I don't need to use it, then I don't need to use it. You know, I'll just turn that bit off. Each module on the Fusion is you can switch on and off individually, take it out the signal path. It's a really nice unit. And then in the insert of the Fusion, generally I use the SSL Bus Plus. Now I've talked about the SSL Bus Plus and I've used it on this channel loads of times, so you should know what it is by now. It's their bus compressor, the classic SSL bus compressor, but it's on steroids. It's got low and high EQ, it's got mid-side options, it's got some stereo, it's got original classic stereo, it can be dual mono. You've got the high and low frequency compressors as well. It's even got a hidden transient shaper, which I'm still playing around with. I'm going to mess about with that and do a video about that sometime. You've got to get to it with this little code thing that it's quite fun. But the SSL Bus Plus is a really, really good compressor. It's got the 4K saturation mode as well. So that runs in the insert of the Fusion. And then once I've got the signal out of the Fusion, so it's got the UV EQ, the Fusion, the Bus Plus in the insert, that I get the Bus Plus to make it really, really, really punchy. And then finally, recently, I've been putting the whole mix through the IGS Tube Core compressor, which is a phenomenal compressor. It's totally different to the Bus Plus. If you saw my tier list video on all my audio gear, you'll know that it is my favorite piece of gear I own at the moment, with the Bus Plus coming number 2, but I use them together. It's like the opposite of the Bus Plus. I make it super punchy with the Bus Plus and all that transient slap and all of that sort of, I don't know, it's all of that SSL punch, and then the IGS Tube Core just rounds out the bottom end. There's kind of a low frequency bump on the frequency response, but there's so much saturation, but even if you overdo it, it still sounds nice. Somehow that unit, you just can't really overdo it unless you really overdo it. You know, whatever you do with it, it sounds nice. And a lot of the time I run that fairly subtly compression wise, but I run it in mid-side mode. So I'm running the SSL Bus Plus in some stereo, and then I run the IGS Tube Core in mid-side mode, just kind of compressing but more saturating the sides different to the mid, and it gives a beautiful image to whatever width I've done on the Fusion, but it rounds the bottom end and rounds the bass drum, really glues things together in an opposite way to the way the Bus Plus does it, and the two working together give me all that punch, but then all that beautiful sort of vintage roundness at the bottom end. So that's what's on my master bus. I'm not saying I'd use all of those. Sometimes I might just use the Bus Plus, sometimes I might just use the IGS Tube Core, sometimes I might not use the Fusion. I might just go from the UV EQ directly into the IGS Tube Core or directly into the Bus Plus, and with the patch bay I can do all of that. But They're the things that are generally on my mix bus. Now let's talk about mastering. If I'm mastering a track that I've mixed that's had all of that on it, obviously I'm not putting any of that on again. I will live entirely inside the box. But if I'm mastering a track from someone else and it hasn't had any of that, then I will generally, first thing I'll do is I'll EQ the track just in case there's any real horrible things that I need to take out. So I will EQ the track so it sounds nice to my ears, give it a bit of headroom, you know, all of that kind of stuff. I generally normalize it to the same LUFS, usually -21, so that if I've got a load of songs, they're all kind of in a ballpark similar loudness, you know, according to the LUFS algorithm anyway. So I'll get it there. I'll do any little repairs. Sometimes I'll use spectra layers to repair if there's any, if I hear a scratch or an odd noise or something like that. So I'll get the track as nice as I can with some EQ and any little repairs that I need to do, fade, stuff like that, whatever happens. Sometimes I'll go through and I'll chop out the verses different to the chorus. So sometimes I'll bring the verse down by, say, a dB or even 2 dB, and then the bridge might be 1 dB down. So when it gets to the chorus, the volume's getting louder in those places. And I like doing that before the compressor. So the compressor's basically still keeping it a loud level, but it's less compressed when it goes through the bus plus and the tube core, you know, or either or both together. You know, it'll be less compressed because I'll have brought down the verses a bit and brought down the bridge a bit. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. But if you want to make something kick in and be loud in the chorus, just turn the whole mix up a bit. I mean, that's what we used to do back in the day on the master faders, just ride the whole mix during the song. So yeah, I will start by getting the track together, and then I'll send it out through that same chain that I'd use on my master bus. So it will go UVEQ, Fusion, Bus Plus, IGS Tube Core. Might not be all of them, might be all of them, same as my master bus. And then after that, we get to the stuff that I would do if it was one of my mixes that I'd already had all that stuff going through. I sometimes do another stage of EQ then, something where I might be doing certain subtle things in the box. Now, I have been known to use smart EQ if I'm finding something that's annoying me, and it's particularly if it's a moving target and I'm using their adaptive mode, which can kind of track moving targets fairly nicely. So sometimes I use smart EQ, but a lot of the time there's an IK multimedia plugin, which is the Master 422, which is a lovely mastering EQ. So I will use that in the box afterwards, sometimes after all the compression layers and the last thing in the chain being the IGS tube core. Sometimes I just want to give it maybe a little bit more top end, or take out you know, never more than a dB, but just like a dB around sort of like 2.7 or 3.4K or something like that. Those kind of things. There's other tricks you can do. Sometimes you can boost the 3K by a dB and then cut sort of 300 hertz by 1 dB to get rid of some low mid. Sometimes I need to do that kind of stuff, but they're really, really small changes at that point. So I'll have that. Then sometimes it's some kind of like multi-band compression. I'm not a big fan of multi-band compressors. I always say if you're reaching for multi-band compressors, particularly in mixes and on tracks, then you're dealing with a problem rather than doing something that you want to do. You know, I didn't really grow up with multi-band compressors in the analog world, so I don't use them that much, but sometimes I use multi-band compression. Sometimes I'll use something which will do like spectral compression. So if there's some harshness going on in the top end, I might, you know, I've got the high frequency compressor in the Fusion, which deals with some of that. But if I need it to be really, really granular, Smart Comp can do that. I've even been known, confession time here, I've even been known to use Waves IDX. Just never more than 10. It's got a dial that goes from 0 to 100. And I've never used it more than 10. Sometimes, again, it can tame certain things if there's something sounding harsh. So that will go in there if there's any kind of multi-band stuff. Some mixes just don't need that at all. Some of them also don't need the EQ chain, but if I need them, those two will be in. I don't use any saturators and stuff in the box anymore because I've got so much saturation going on out here that I really don't need to do much of that. I used to use the Stealth Limiter by IK Multimedia. I found that to be very transparent, and I still really like that. And if I'm doing something that needs to be fairly transparent, then I will use the Stealth Limiter. I'll give you an example. Recently, Ozzy Floyd put out the Dark Side of the Moon video on YouTube. We did the whole of the Dark Side of the Moon album, and I used the stealth limiter in the final stage on that. I had the IGS tube core before it, and then the stealth limiter. I didn't use the Fusion, and I didn't use the SSL Bus Plus. I just used the tube core and then the stealth limiter, and it sounded much more transparent. But if I'm doing a rock song and I really want some aggression, I don't mind if it kind of pumps a bit and distorts a bit, and I'm not looking for that transparency. I'm really enjoying Smart Limit at the moment. It just seems to do that thing where algorithmically it's making it sound louder without losing the punch, probably by masking certain frequencies and distorting certain frequencies to allow them to be heard, and using psychoacoustics and all sorts of things that I really know very little about. I find that the Smart Limit is nowhere near as transparent, even with all the tricks turned off. Stealth limiter is much more transparent, so it would be one of those two limiters. Recently I've been using Smart Limit on all the rock stuff, but I did use the stealth limiter on the Dark Side mix because Floyd, I don't know, and then the live recording and everything, I wanted my mix to come through transparently. I didn't want to just whack loads of compression on it, whack loads of limiting on it. They are my master bus chains, but I will mention a couple of things. Before I had the IGS tube core, sometimes I would use after the Bus Plus, so I would have mixed through the Bus Plus, and then in mastering I'd do one of two things. I used to send the mix out to my Blackline Audio B17 2As in the 2A sides as a stereo pair. So, and sometimes I bounce the left and then bounce the right through the same one so that they had the same character, because they are slightly different on the left and the right if I use those two. So I'd bounce those through them, and I'd also bounce in bypass mode, I'd bounce the original audio through, because I could tell when you parallel mixed in that the two A's from there, when you parallel mix them in, I can actually hear the high frequencies getting a bit screwed up with the phase shift of the fact that they've been through a converter and back. So I then run the original signal just through a converter and back, just so that I've got the same phase shift on both of those, and then I'll parallel mix in some of the 2As. That's what I used to do before I had the IGS tube core. Or if I was in the box, I love the IK Multimedia Compressor, which is their take on the Distressor, which is obviously, it's a classic compressor. It sounds great. I've never used one for long enough. I've used, for half hour here or there, but I've never owned one. But that plugin sounds fantastic. I don't know how good it is compared to the real thing, but what it does sounds great, and I love the saturation modes on it, the dist 1 and dist 2 for distortion 1, distortion 2. They sound great, and sometimes I really slam that compressor and then use it in parallel, and I've also done that on drum buses as well with that IK Multimedia Compressor. It's a wonderful plugin. So they're things that I have used that I probably wouldn't use now because I've got other things in analog that I'd rather use, but they are things that I'd use. So yeah, in the box, one mention that I should say that I still do use quite a bit is the IK Multimedia 1 plugin, which is like an all-in-one mastering thing, and I pretty much have everything in it turned off with the exception of the transient. And if I'm not doing analog width stuff or any other width stuff, the width control in that, so I use the width control in that, and sometimes I just turn up the transients in the IK Multimedia 1 mastering plugin. And I find of all the kind of the transient things that I use on masters, that gives me a natural sound. Other ones, they definitely bring out the transients, and there's some other tricks that I can do to bring out transients, but that to me, just a tiny touch, it's like, oh yeah, there it is, it's just giving it the punch that I want. Especially using that, I don't tend to use that on my own mixes. I tend to use that if I'm mastering something for someone else. I'll use that to push the transients a bit more before it goes through the Fusion and the Bus Plus and the IGS tube core. So although those compressors will be sucking it back, because the more transient I put in, the more kind of pumping I can get, particularly from the Bus Plus, and the more punchy I can make it sound, where it's kind of scooping out those bits between the drums with the long attack and all of that. It just sounds fantastic using that. So that is a plugin I still do use from time to time. So yeah, it really is a hybrid setup. There's certain things in the box and there's certain things outside the box. And don't overlook the Waves IDX. It certainly doesn't work on everything, and waves get a bad name, but when it's useful, it's really, really useful. And stock plugins as well. I do use EQ wise, if I'm not using Smart EQ, I do use the frequency plugin that's built into Cubase. It's an 8-band EQ, but it's got dynamics in it, it's got mid-side mode, it's got all sorts of stuff. So that's a really useful EQ, and sometimes I have them between all different bits and pieces where I just want to make minor tweaks. You know, I use that because it's a fairly low overhead plugin, certainly more low overhead than Smart EQ or some of the others. I'm confessing to you some of my mix bus and master bus chain and my mastering settings there. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you've got suggestions on what you think I could do better, put them in the comments. If you've got any questions, put them in the comments. I love answering questions, and I will see you in another video. Please like, subscribe, share. Goodbye.